Hey there, everyone. Um, I'm glad to have a talk today over migration of our Reactjs project to the Nextjs. So I think, but before I get started, I love to introduce myself briefly. I'm Yogini, and I'm a co-founder at PureList, and I take care of all the engineering stuffs in the PureList. So I have overall 5 years of experience working in JavaScript, and it's been a year that we are building and working on PureList. So I think before I can get started, I would love to before I actually start with the migration topic, I would love to give you a little backstory of why we chose React.js at the first place. So it's like almost around a year before we started working on PureList, and it was just a side project. So I wanted to build it because I wanted to showcase my React.js skills. So that is how it all gets started, and then at that time React.js project was working very fluently for us. There wasn't any problem in the React.js till the moment we didn't launch, and once we started scaling the product, we started facing the problems with our React.js project. So what was those? First of all, just yeah. So, what exactly triggered us with React.js? So, when Purely started as a side project, I was looking at it to showcase my React.js skills, and that is why I started with playing with my strength. That okay, let's go, let's build a project in React.js because I'm quite familiar with it. But when scaling started with Purelist, we started facing three major problems. One was the SEO. So, because Purelist is a consumer social product, SEO was most necessary part for us. So basically every Purelist profile has to be ranked in the Google search at least in the first 10 results. That was our main aim. But with React.js project and with client-side rendering, this was not achievable. There were many solutions which React has to offer, or Create React app has to offer on the server-side rendering part. But what we felt that it was not scalable or not a robust solutions. Second problem which we faced with React was the performance. So, with scaling, with adding new features, the performance of the React app was downgrading because we were still experimenting with our features and our product. Third, the problem which we faced was the routing issue. So we all know that React don't have its native routing support. So we were using React Router to set up the routing. But the problem with React Router was it was very much heavily logical based. So you have to write logic every time you add a new routing, you add a new route. So that was quite easy initially, but as the app started getting complicated and we started introducing more and more use cases, we had to redo most of the times the routing part, which was little painful. So, out of all these three problems, the performance and routing could have been solved using React itself. But again, then we started understanding that is there any other framework which is giving us the solution inbuilt? Because in that case, it will be very easy for us. So that is when we started thinking about going with the Next.js. So, what exactly triggered the migration to the Next.js? And also, what are the benefits or what are the features Next.js has to offer? Let's move into that. So, when we thought of migrating to Next.js, the first thing which came in our mind is it is a React.js framework. So, migration is going to be pretty easy because the core concepts of React, we can build that into Next.js as is. We just have to add in few features which are native to Next.js and which will be required for our use cases. So I think before I move ahead in this talk, I would love to like emphasize on one thing. So React.js is a pretty good framework, and we really didn't face any problems with React. But there are certain use cases for our app which was not suitable for React. So that is when the Next.js we thought about, and these are the advantages or these are the benefits which we thought of Next.js will provide us, which will be helpful for building Pure List. So first of all, it has an inbuilt support of server-side rendering. So if you know that in Next.js there are two, three options of data fetching, which also includes the server side rendering part. Because as I said that the pure list is a consumer social app where every user's data is a hero, we wanted to have a server side rendering app which will improve our SEO and also the Google rank. So that is where that was a deal maker for us while going to the Next.js. Second is its inbuilt routing. So Next.js supports the file system routing. So which was again an added advantage over the React routing part, which I already mentioned. Then fourth point was the code splitting and performance. We tested some scenarios where image loading or so what are the benefits of code splitting over the app, and we found that exact same code base as a Next.js would perform really well as compared to React.js being a consumer social app. And the last one was serverless API routes. So initially, our backend wasn't in JavaScript, but there were some things that we wanted to make a project as a complete single project, complete single repositories where your backend and frontend is in a single repo, and we are operating that from one single project. So that is why we thought of serverless API routes from the Next.js was pretty amazing for us. So we just thought of adding the Node.js APIs and plug and play, and it was good to build for us. So that is, these are the pointers which we thought that Next.js can change and make our lives little easier as compared to React.js. So now moving on, I would love to like emphasize on all of these points one by one, that what were the thought process behind Next.js, how it helped in our use case, and how we achieved what we wanted to achieve. So out of these, the first and the most important part which Next.js has to offer is the data fetching. All the other benefits or all the other problems which I talked about for the React are achievable by including some or the other packages. But this data fetching side of Next.js is pretty amazing to consider while switching from React to Next. So Next.js has three basic data fetching things to offer. One was static site generation. So what is a static site generation? I'll be briefly sharing about all of the three methods that Next.js data fetching offers. I don't want to go in much details into that because we have other things to cover as well. But to briefly give the idea of static site generation, so what happens is uh, in static site generation, Next.js will perform all the data fetching operations in the server and save the HTML form of that particular page. So whenever you request for that page, that HTML form will be shipped to you from the server side. All this happens in the build time. So that is why it's almost like it almost like the websites which we used to see 10-15 years back, but this is like highly performant websites. This is the best use case when you have a blog or something which doesn't update quite frequently. The second one is server side rendering. So server side rendering have one advantage that it fetches the data on every request you make from the server. So whenever you do the request, the page which is served from the server is always updated. And it because of this, server side rendering has the best SEO part, which is offered by Next.js. So you might listen me saying talking a lot about SEO, but I think SEO was the major use case we considered while moving to Next.js. So apart from SSG and SSR, there is the third method, which is dynamic incremental generation, which you can consider as a best of the two worlds. So what happens is in dynamic incremental generation, with every request, you do a server call, but it is saved as a HTML file and which will be served to you. You can also change the intervals while fetching the data from the server. So these three are the best things which Next.js offers and which are like quite a fit for almost all the use cases. But apart from these three, if you have an app where you just have a dashboard which do not need any SEO support or which do not need any SSR, then I think still React can offer a very good solutions in such projects. So out of these three, we chose to go with server-side rendering because we wanted to have a very rock solid SEO from our end, And also there were some features in purelist which were aligned towards having server side rendering. So let's talk about what are those features and can we achieve that using or how we achieve that using the server side rendering part. So the first thing which Next.js has to offer is the custom head tag. So with custom head tags, you can add custom meta tags as well on every single page. What it helps is that suppose if I am sharing my Purelist profile into some other platform, for example, I'm sharing my profile on Twitter. In that case, the meta tags for that particular link, I can push my own meta tags to that particular link because of these custom head tags which Next.js has to offer. Apart from that, we also tried doing the dynamic OG image. So on the right hand side, you can see the link previews of every Purelist profile. So what we did is with the server side rendering, with every profile update, we created this dynamic OG image and which is served as a link preview when every time a Purelist link is shared. So because users data is what we wanted to highlight, you can see that every Purelist profile has a different OG image or a link preview images. You must have seen the same implementation for GitHub, Hashnode, or Dev2 blogs. Those are the pretty good examples for dynamic OG images as well. And the third, but not the least, feature for the SEO was dynamic sitemap generation. So with get server side props in the Next.js, you can actually do the dynamic sitemap generation. But why the dynamic sitemap generation was needed? So for a platform like Purelist, where every day new profiles are getting created, we wanted to list them all in the Google search rankings. So for that, we wanted to list them all in the sitemaps. So rather than taking all the load to ourselves, we automated that process flawlessly by using the Next.js. So in the below on the left side, you can see our impressions on Google. So the red circle date is the date when we actually migrated our tech stack from Next.js, from Reactjs to Next.js, and you can see the how the impressions on Google actually got improved after the migration. So, as we all know that SEO is something which takes time to reflect, we can see that we are slowly and gradually, but it is increasing in a very good way. So, apart from SEO and server side rendering, there were some add ons which we also considered while migrating from React.js to Next.js. The first of all was routing. So as I mentioned earlier, React Router was pretty cool, but needed every time it needed some logic when we want to implement 404 or rerouting stuffs. So for that, Next.js routing was a savior. We didn't had to plan our routing a lot because Next.js supports out of the box routing for the page level. Of course, it added the load on us to change the file structure or folder structure, but it was worth the change seeing the routing and how robust it is. Apart from routing, the major impact was on code splitting and performance. So if you check the Create React app, you can still do lazy loading and code splitting in that, but that you have to implement in Next.js. That is the inbuilt tool, and you don't have to take care of code splitting. So that will always serve. So in the build bundle, you don't have to like add all the files from the project. They will get added as they are fetched. So that improves the performance a lot. With the same project converted into Next.js, we saw the performance increasing in the Lighthouse by almost 40 points. So that was a major thing for us to consider. Apart from that, with code splitting, Next.js also offers the image optimization. So there is one example where we tried showing up a 1 MB image with a normal HTML tag, and with Next.js and its responsiveness features, we could actually optimize it to 233 KB for a normal web screen, and for mobile, it went to 17.2 KBs, which is a huge performance improvement. That too without adding any other packages, which is built in for Next. So that was again a very good side for us to consider Next.js and good advantage when we migrated from React to Next. Apart from that, we also did our backend shift. So we went from server to serverless API routes. So if you all know that there is one API folder inside the Next.js which supports you to add Node.js APIs inside it. Just like the pages we add in the routing, in a similar way we can add the APIs as well. So when we move to serverless APIs, the whole project, the front end and back end of the project becomes a single repository, which helps us save our duplication of business logic and also the developer productivity. So these were the added advantages which Next.js gave us over the React. So all this is good, but the most important part was what are the challenges we faced while doing this migration. So also, I'm talking about these challenges which we faced and which are common for most of the use cases, but there are certain things which are very, very particular and specific to what we have faced. So the first thing was React router to Next.js native router. So as I mentioned earlier, that Next.js has inbuilt file system routing. So our earlier folder structure used to be that if there is some particular page, all the components for that particular page used to rely in the same folder. But because Next.js has a file system routing, we had to change that. So that do included some of the business logic changes, which was heavily relying on the routing. So that change was there, was a challenging part for us. Second was, so when you migrate from React to Next, so React router supports that when you move from one path to another path, you can exchange the state between two paths, which is not supported in Next.js. So because of that, we had to add some more Redux state updates in that, but which was like pretty easier for us to implement. But that was a challenge which we faced while migrating the routers. Apart from that, we also had to add the server-side rendering for certain pages. So there were some pages which has to be publicly available without even requiring the authentication. So just now, even if you are not logged in, but if you hit purelist.io/yogini, you can see my whole profile. So for those rendering pages, those which needs to have a better SEO, we have to move from client side data fetching to the server side rendering. So that was a challenge because server side rendering has some steps to follow, and for that we had to change a little logic behind it. So that was again a challenging part. And the third and the most challenging part for the migration was moving from server API to the serverless APIs. So we thought of moving our backend from PostgreSQL to MongoDB and from Java to Node.js. Though the earlier tech stack wasn't a problem for us and it was working very fluently and smoothly, but what we wanted was to have a single project with JavaScript so that all of our engineers can work together on the single repository. This change gave us a good this saved a redundancy for us because there wasn't a duplication of business logic. So I'll share one small use case. So in Purelist profile, if you have seen, so while you create your profile, we count the profile completion percentage. So earlier what used to happen is that profile completion percentage was getting calculated differently in the backend and differently in the front end. But with this migration and having a Node.js APIs, we store that into a into a single function, and that single function is used. So the duplication of business logic is saved, and that way we were able to rectify a lot of bugs. So that was again a savior. So these, I think these are the challenges that we faced, which is obvious for most of the migration process. And apart from that, there are some basic tags which we have to implement with Next.js, which are not there in React. For example, the link tag, the image tag, which are not native for the React, but which are native for the Next.js. So for any project, if you want to migrate from React to Next, the first thing you will have to implement is go and change the routing. Once you implement the file path routing, I think that most of the major task is pretty much done and you're good to go with the Next.js. But if you want to add the native Next.js features to your project, then you might face some challenges for moving away from React and to the Next. But apart from that, I must say the migration process was pretty smooth because both being based on React. So because Next.js is based as a React framework, so that is why the migration process was pretty smooth, and we were able to go ahead with the basic setup that we had. So now, after all of the migration, what were the outcomes that we achieved? So this is like general outcome, not specific to the technologies, but overall as a product, what we achieved. So one was uniformity in the business logic. So as I mentioned earlier about the profile percentage completion logic. So we optimized a lot of logic like that, and that is why it was easier to rectify many bugs from that process. Obviously, I'm talking about a lot more on SEO. So we got a better organic growth because we migrated to server side rendering. Then the third is we reduced the burden on the engineering team due to the single JavaScript ecosystem. So this was one of the favorite advantages because all our engineers became full stack because we moved to JavaScript. So now everyone can do the front end and the back end because of a single repository. Apart from that, we also reduced the delivery time, so we could able to build fast and ship faster. So because everything is into JavaScript, the implementation became fast, and that is why we were able to ship faster than we used to earlier because of the frictions in the two different domains and technologies. Apart from that, then there is improved app performance due to the native Next.js features. So as I mentioned that because of the image tag and because of code splitting and all of these features, the performance was highly improved in the Next.js app. And of course, so as everyone is talking about the hiring problem, hiring a single JavaScript developer becomes pretty easy for us as compared to hiring two developers, one in Java and one in JavaScript. So that solved a lot of our problems. So I think that was a story behind how we migrated from React.js to Next.js. It was a really good experience for us because we got to learn so much into that process. We were able to revisit our logic, revisit our implementation, and we could improve it a lot. So this helped us improving our lighthouse performance tests. It helped us in SEO ranking and overall performance of the app. So yeah, that is, I think that is it from my end, and would love to take any questions or anything if anyone have.